The supreme evil of war is surely not death, but despair. So wrote E.M. Forster, novelist, in 1915. The reality of war leads to hopelessness. We long for peace, but in the shadow of Anzac Day, we recognise that war is not just a historic, but a present reality. The Ukrainian conflict could apparently be solved in 24 hours with just one phone call, but it seems intractable. The Gaza conflict becomes simply more and more horrendous. But it's not just war that's over there, it seems to be coming closer as the trumpet of the patriots keep reminding us we have had Chinese warships having live firing exercises in our own waters. We are being warned by experts such as Professor David Kilcullen in The Australian earlier this year to brace for the impact of a disrupted world. We have multiple major powers. We have a collapse in confidence in experts and new technology leading to new domains, means and methods of conflict. One of these new domains is cyber warfare, which means, according to our Defence Minister, Richard Marles, that our defence forces are now battling in a grey zone where the binary idea of war and peace no longer applies. Which raises the question of hope. Is there hope for peace? The temptation may be to retreat from such thinking and search for inner peace in the midst of an uncertain world and often violent world. Turn your back on the world and think about personal serenity. But issues of war and peace ask questions that we cannot avoid. Sebastian Faulks, known to many as the writer of the novel Birdsong, edited a book called A Broken World: Letters, Diaries and Memories of the Great War. In the introduction, he asks, Europe's enthusiastic discovery of genocide in 1914 to 1918 make a mockery of the preceding 500 years, rendering such terms as the Renaissance and the Enlightenment simple self-delusion. And if this war showed the true nature of the human creature, its limitless capacity for killing once the means are in its hands, how are we to deal with our revised knowledge of what we are? War not only asks questions about our broken world, but asks questions of us. How broken are we? And in the face of such questions, how's the serenity? These are the questions then that we're going to try and deal with today. It's the start of a series that I've called Hopeless Sermons. Now there's a question mark in the middle. Hopeless Sermons. Looking at issues and ideas in which we may have placed our hope and they have been a forlorn hope, or ones that we continue to hope in, but actually we should realise that they are hopeless. And think, what does Christianity and a faith in the risen Jesus have to say into these issues? Now, clearly in a short sermon, not all the issues that are going to be raised can be dealt with. Particularly today, if I was truly to deal with all these issues, it really would be war and peace. However, I hope that questions will be raised that we can continue to reflect on and talk about afterwards, and it will point our thinking in a Christian direction, and we will find hope in the right places and in the right person. I'd like to start by just reminding us that the first words of the risen Jesus to his disciples in both Luke and in John is, "Peace be with you." As we consider our world, we might want to think, well, he's dreaming. But there is more than a dream here. The disciples are reminded that here is reality standing in front of them. Touch me, feel me, I am flesh and bone. Which means just as Jesus is real, so his promise of peace is real. Now, it's worth us reflecting on this just for a moment, because remember, Jesus has just been the victim of a horrendous miscarriage of justice. He has then been excruciatingly crucified. And he's promised that he's going to come back. Now, how would Hollywood deal with that setup? Miscarriage of justice, horrible violence, I'll be back. What happens is more violence. General MacArthur, I shall return. What happens when he returns? The war continues. What do we see in our world when people return to power? Revenge and retribution. Yet here is Jesus vindicated, returned to power, returning to his disciples who had abandoned him, his disciples who had betrayed him. And his message is not, well, you're really for it now. It is, peace be with you. He in particular restores Peter following his failure and gives him forgiveness, reconciliation, and a recommission to be the lead disciple. This, therefore, isn't just peace conceptually, peace, man. This is peace in action, peace being lived out. And the message that was to be taken to the world wasn't fighting talk, but forgiveness talk. And it was a message of forgiveness and grace and peace to all nations. Peter, therefore, could sum up the ministry of Jesus in Acts 10 as preaching peace. He truly is the Prince of Peace, the one promised in Isaiah. You may have been a little confused that we had a Christmas reading the week after Easter, but it's that child who grows up to be this man who is the Prince of Peace, who preaches and lives out peace. The resurrection then does mean that peace has a chance. But we can, indeed we should, think further about this. Jesus being raised from the dead is a vindication of all his ways. It's God's big tick saying that guy got it right. And so Jesus' ways and actions of peace are how we are to live. Here is what humanity should be like. We are to follow his ways. Further, we are to follow his teaching, what he taught. And what did he teach? Blessed are the peacemakers. And we can say that God agrees with that. Jesus being raised from the dead is God's going, he got that right. Blessed are the peacemakers. But perhaps most remarkably, Jesus has taught and shown that if you have understood me, you understand the Father. If you have seen me, you've seen the Father. Which means, therefore, if we can put it bluntly, if Jesus is a man of peace, then God is a God of peace. This idea of God being a God of peace and his very nature being tied to the resurrection is caught for us in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 20, where it is the God of peace, who raised our Lord Jesus Christ from the dead. How do we know he's a God of peace? Because he raised Jesus from the dead, the man of peace. He is the God of peace who raised the Prince of Peace so that peace could be proclaimed to all people in all the world. To believe in the resurrection of Jesus leads to both the hope of peace and a commitment to be people of peace. Now, I suspect in raising that, there's a few questions going on in people's heads. Now, I could just go, I don't have time. We're just not going to deal with any questions. But I'm going to deal with a couple. And the first one is, well, if God's a God of peace, explain the Old Testament. There's so much war, there's so much violence. Now, it's very tempting right now to go, I don't have time. But I think we can say three things. Firstly, I want to work outwards from the resurrection. That's always where I want to start. And if the resurrection shows me that God is a God of peace, I'm going to work backwards to work out how does that play its way out in the Old Testament. So I start there. Secondly, Would the scriptures actually be believable if the Old Testament was just people running around with sheep and cows all day and everything was fine and beautiful? We'd go, that's not our world. That's not the world we live in. One of the beautiful things about the scriptures is the biblical faith is a real world faith built into history, and history is violent. It's no surprise that there is war and violence in the Old Testament. But in the Old Testament, we have perhaps the most famous promise of peace, which is on the floor of the United Nations. It comes from Micah chapter 4 about God turning the swords into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks, which means the Old Testament itself looks forward to a day of peace, not just when the mechanisms of war are turned into productive agricultural implements, but even the very mindset of war has been dealt with and the humanity has been retuned so that we no longer follow the paths of war. All of which suggests we can't easily just dismiss the Old Testament as a path to peace. But what do I mean by peace? Peace is not simply in the Bible the absence of war, that which happens when conflict ends. Peace is when everything is put right. The Hebrew word is shalom. It means everything in its right place. So a stone with no cracks is shalom. A wall that is complete and without break is shalom. Peace in the Bible is not just the absence of wrong, but things being put right. This is beautifully put in the wonderfully peaceful Psalm 85, where we were told that God will restore his people, speak peace to them, and we're told that steadfast love and faithfulness will meet, righteousness and peace will kiss each other. Here we can see that peace and righteousness have the most intimate relationship. This means that the biblical idea of peace, of true peace, is always moral. It is bound up with the idea of justice and judgment. The role of judgment is to bring about peace, shalom, everything put right. Peace then is much more than simply accepting the status quo and finding personal serenity. It is being willing to be militant peacemakers, fighting for justice, which is the path to true peace. This is the peace that Jesus gave his life for, and it is the peace that he offers us. Understanding this as the idea of peace leads us to another reflection. Jesus has shown his disciples that all that has happened to him is according to plan. He opens their mind that they may understand the whole sweep of the scriptures, to see that his death and resurrection are central to the bigger plan of God restoring the world. See, the Bible starts with all at peace. All is good. It's repeated in Genesis 1 regularly. All is good. All is at peace. And you can describe it as a triangle. God's people in God's place, God's people in I haven't really thought this through, how I need a triangle. God's person, you get the idea. God's people in God's place under his rule. But humanity rebels against God's rule and the triangle is broken. Peace is quickly lost, violence flourishes, and it is not the world that it is supposed to be. We see it is truly a broken world and that we are broken people. God's plan was through Jesus to bring about this peace again. For he truly was God's person in God's creation under his rule. He truly is the man of peace. Remember, not my will, but yours be done. God's person under God's rule in God's place. His mission is to welcome us through forgiveness into that same relationship. We are invited to be God's people in God's creation under his rule, knowing this is peace. True peace and true serenity. He welcomes us into this relationship so we can be agents of this peace. to show a broken world a different way of living. God is a peacemaker. Jesus is a peacemaker. So we, followers of Jesus, are to be peacemakers. We do so knowing that God's kingdom will come. His will be done on earth as it is in heaven. God's people in God's place, under God's rule, where righteousness and peace kiss, is the future. That is where this world is headed. It is what is promised in the resurrection, a peace that is as true as the resurrection. The resurrection then gives us a sure path from despair and hopelessness in our world and in ourselves to a true hope of true peace. And because we're talking about resurrection, it's not just peace in another world, but hope for and in this world for peace. Peace, as demonstrated in Jesus' resurrection then, is at the heart of reality. It is fundamentally true of this world. And we need to recognise how absolutely revolutionary this is. If you're a committed evolutionist, what is fundamental is survival of the fittest. The winners live. In Marxism, it's a class struggle that is fundamental as the working class seek to gain control of the means of production. In capitalism, competition is fundamental. Work to get ahead of others. In all these philosophies, what is central is conflict. For the Bible, for God, what we see in the risen Jesus is that peace is fundamental. Peace is not the outcome of conflict, but rather it is a peace that triumphs. I wonder what you think is central to existence. What do you see at the heart of reality? Do we really think that reality is really for the fittest? That it's really for those who control the means of production? That those who die with the most toys win? Do we really think that's what life is about? I suspect deep down that we have this longing for peace with everything in its right place. We know that's how the world should be. And our despair as we experience the world as it is because we know it should not be like this. Actually, that despair points us then to a deeper reality. Where did we get the idea that the world shouldn't be like this? Could it be an echo that we have been made in the image of God to live as his people in his place under his rule? Is that sense of brokenness actually pointing us to what a restored world looks like? We believe in peace despite the evidence. Why? Because deep down we know that God is a God of peace. Our despair points us to a different reality that we have lost. And in Jesus, we are invited to regain it. The resurrection of Jesus, in the resurrection of Jesus, hope arises. Hope for peace arises. For it points us to the reality we long for. So what does a hope-filled, peacemaking world look like? What does it mean for us? Now, at this point, for anybody who watched at 8 o'clock, there was an exciting moment because I turned to the next page and there was no next page. So I had to make up the end of the sermon. You get the full script and it's so much longer. No, we're almost there. Firstly, we need to be working for peace in our world. And we need to remember that peace is about morality as well. In other words, it's much more difficult than simply appeasement. There needs to be justice, which may mean conflict, but we mustn't let that be the easy path. We need to remember that it may be easy, but it's ultimately the costly path. We and our leaders should heed the words of Pope Francis. Countries, instead of testing the weapon of dialogue, of understanding or negotiation, we are going to the weapon of arrogance and of war. We need to be people of peace in our community. That will mean turning from the social media rabbit holes that we can so quickly fall down that reinforce our prejudices and divisions against the other, whoever the other may be, leading to division in our community. We need to let God's shalom rule in our hearts and get rid of any isms that it finds there, whatever your ism may be. Shalom should banish it, and we should be reshaped so that we are shaped by hope, not shaped by fear and despair, as some of our political advertising may want us to do. Hope, not despair. Closer to home, the church is to be a model of peace. Jesus said to his disciples, "Peace be with you," and not being Anglicans, they didn't realise they were supposed to respond, "and also with you." They were a little too surprised. But Paul in his letters could write at the start of every letter, "Grace and peace to you." The church should be a place of peace, a peace that we share with others. Now, obviously, we have not always done this well. And for those who have not been greeted with or experienced peace in church, I am sorry. But let us, as followers of the Prince of Peace, commit ourselves to be a place where peace and righteousness flourish and they kiss each other. But lastly, and I suspect most importantly, peace is something that we should pray for passionately. It is in this most peaceful of activities that we are most militantly peacemakers. Because we recognise that ultimately peace is God's work. We play our part, but ultimately it's his work to bring his kingdom. Too often prayers for peace sound a little bit like flippant words of the beauty contestant who wants world peace and enjoys water sports. We should pray believing that God can change the hearts of men and women and change our hearts about men and women. And pray knowing that peace is God's ultimate aim, it's his ultimate purpose, and the day will come when Jesus will return and say, "Peace be with you." Amen.